Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today I'm going to be talking about Realms of Terrinoth. This is my review for the Fantasy Flight Games fantasy-based tabletop role-playing game, Realms of Terrinoth. It just came out about a month or two ago. It's fairly new, and this is my review. All right, so first I'm going to give a summary of my feelings on the game and my rating for the game, and then I'm going to kind of dig in a little more detail, okay? All right, so here's my summary of my review for Realms of Terrinoth. So Realms of Terrinoth is the tabletop role-playing game. It's fantasy. It's set as exactly the level of power as Dungeons & Dragons. It really is a Dungeons & Dragons alternative. It has some differences, but it you know, if you look at this next, if you look at Realms of Terrinoth directly next to Dungeons & Dragons, it's virtually the same, right? It really looks the same. The difference is the narrative dice. So Fantasy Flight Games built a narrative dice system for Star Wars. They had incredible success with the Fantasy Flight Star Wars tabletop role-playing game with the narrative dice. The narrative dice truly are one of the best innovations in tabletop role-playing games since the very beginning. They're arguably one of the only actual physical innovations within the game, like in 43 years, right? And narrative dice truly are incredibly good. So this is a review of Genesis, the Genesis system, the generic universal role-playing system, which powers Realms of Terrinoth. Realms of Terrinoth cannot be played without Genesis, okay? Now, what's my opinion? What's my overall opinion of this game? 5 out of 5 star game. I absolutely love it. There are things I don't like in Realms of Terrinoth. The vast majority of things in Realms of Terrinoth I do like. So the reason I'm giving it 5 out of 5 stars is any points it loses for craft, rules, world, how the game is crafted, the rules it uses, the world it portrays, are vastly made up by what the game accomplishes overall. So what is Realms of Terrinoth and what is it accomplishing? Well, we talked about Dungeons & Dragons. It is a modern game, okay? That's a big deal, right? Because a lot of people are like, oh, I don't mind playing a game that's 20 years old. I do, and most players do, right? And there's a bunch of old weird there's a bunch of grognards. I'm not going to say they're weird. They're just grognards, right? But there's a bunch of grognards who are like, I love 20-year-old games. Well, the vast majority of people don't, right? And when you go to get people to play a tabletop role-playing game, that's a hard sell. And to say, oh, hey, here's this 20-year-old game, it's going to be even harder, right? So modern game is important, right? Next, real RPG company. This is a real tabletop role-playing game company, right? This isn't one dude in his garage, like hand-making his hand-packing his Kickstarters, right? That's like, I have mad respect for those guys, but this is a real, like, people put their pants and their skirt on in the morning, go to this place, go to FFG, and make tabletop role-playing games. This is an actual company, right? This isn't a startup. This isn't a guy with aspirations or a woman with aspirations. This is the real deal, man, and that means this game has production value, right? You can buy this book off the shelf at any friendly local game shop, or most friendly local game shops. That's a big deal. It got printed in the thousands. It got mailed out. It has an awesome binding. It has a really good cover. It has amazing art. It has amazing writing. It has amazing layout, right? Now, I'm going to talk about each one of those in a little bit more detail in a minute, but it looks like a real game because it was made by a real tabletop role-playing game company, all right? That's important, right? And then the other thing is it was built to compete directly with Dungeons & Dragons, saying, hey, like, we're not taking your Dungeons & Dragons rules and tweaking it just a little bit. We're not, doing a redux of the Dungeons & Dragons rules. We're not relying on you being a Dungeons & Dragons player to play this, right? It is a right-in-your-face rival to Dungeons & Dragons, and it serves an incredibly important purpose in that space. And the reality why is most of Dungeons & Dragons' real competitors are older, right? And then the other thing is there's a lot of games that are reduxes of Dungeons & Dragons or rely on somebody's knowledge of Dungeons & Dragons to actually play their game, right? That they're just kind of sitting on top of, or they're heartbreakers. They're like Dungeons & Dragons with this twist. This is a complete, Realms of Terrinoth is its own distinct world. It has nothing to do with any of the lore of Dungeons & Dragons. It is distinct. and it stands there toe-to-toe with Dungeons & Dragons as a rival, right? And believe it or not, like Realms of Terrinoth, because it's been built, has a chance of surpassing Dungeons & Dragons. That chance is incredibly low. I would say it's about 5%, right? But it was made by a real company. It's a real book. It can be really played, and it stands as an actual competitor to Dungeons & Dragons. And believe it or not, the more I think about it, if you want to play fantasy tabletop role-playing games, there's kind of a limited list, right? If you want a modern game with great production values, that it is an extremely limited list, right? And that's important too, because everybody's seen Dungeons & Dragons. So when you bring out these other games that are black and white or half the page count, or like players are like, this looks small, why aren't we playing D&D, right? You will not get that when you bring Realms of Terrinoth to the table. It looks like a true competitor to Dungeons & Dragons. And the fact that that is the case is just, I love that. I think that is awesome. I really just love the fact that this is a real rival to the throne, right? Like they're going right at Dungeons & Dragons. They're trying to compete with Dungeons & Dragons, and I love that about Realms of Terrinoth. All right, so let's talk about the game in a little more detail, right? But I just want to repeat, 5 out of 5 star game for this. It was worth every penny that was spent. I absolutely love this game. All right, and by the way, I absolutely love the Genesis system, and this is a great progression of the Genesis system. Okay, all right, so let's talk about it. I'm going to talk about craft, rules, and world, okay? So craft, let's talk about the craft of the game. Every single tabletop role-playing game under the sun has craft. So what is the craft of a tabletop role-playing game? The writing, the art, and the layout. The writing in this is very good, right? The lore, the way the lore is written is very detailed. It's fun to read. It really feels professionally done. It is good writing, right? Not great writing, but it's very solid. It's very good. The art is great. The art is absolutely great, right? I love the art in this. Really high quality. Now, I should say, most of the pieces in this are not new pieces, right? And the reason why is Realms of Terrinoth it's absolutely brilliant from a marketing perspective and from a money perspective. Fantasy Flight Games, this is like found money for them, right? Fantasy Flight Games is primarily a board game company. They make tabletop role-playing games. So they just got Star Wars Legion, which is going to be a big help for them as well. Excuse me. So one of the things is, for the art, so Realms of Terrinoth is actually the fantasy world that was created for the board games Rune War, Runebound, and Descent. They're all similar. They all take place in the same world, which is Manara, okay? Terrinoth is is essentially a continent on Manara, right? And so a ton of the art for this game came from Runebound, Rune Wars, and Descent. Now, I've never played any of those games, but I'm quite aware of them. And so, the art was there. The art is great. It is absolutely top-notch art, okay? Love it, all right? What about the layout? The layout is poor, all right? Actually, no, you know what? I'm sorry. I would say the layout is good, but it makes some mistakes that, honestly, very, very, very few games actually get right. But it would have been really nice if FFG had gotten this. So here's what it does that I think is a problem. Okay, so one, the layout is busy, right? So it uses the standard parchment background, right? Which is, it looks like it was written on parchment. I get that, but it's a little darker than Dungeons & Dragons uses, and then also the art is generally a monster, and it's laid over almost like a PNG. It's laid over like a filter over that parchment and over text, right? And so, on a given page, you got the parchment, you have the monster, you have text, right? And layout is its own thing, and it just looks busy and cramped to me. It really just looked a little busy and cramped, right? And I've just seen better design in games that are really one person shops, so one person making them out of there So I'm like, yeah, this really wasn't that great. The other thing is, when you have the monster manual, you get used to, there's so much value in one monster, one page. I love that, right? That is really cool, and it's so helpful from a lot of different perspectives. And here they don't do that. They're just like, there's like 2.5 monsters on a page, and you're like, oh boy, okay. So when I use this guy, we'll be flipping back and forth, in the and it's frustrating. Now, it is good layout, right? One of the things is they use color really well. They use these sidebars really well. The sidebars look fantastic. They really pop. The layout is good. So I would say writing good, art fantastic, layout good. Layout was my least favorite, right? But I have I'm like really a stickler on layout. More and more, I just feel like a lot of games, are make or break on layout, like as far as their visual presentation. I'll still play a game if it's laid out poorly, but this isn't laid out poorly. It's just, I feel like it was a lot of missed opportunities, okay? All right, so that's craft. Let's talk about rules. Rules, you're going to be talking about innovation, flow, and design. I'm going to talk about innovation, flow, and design. Absolutely innovative rules, right? The rules come from Genesis, and the rules are really, really fantastic in this. I am such a huge fan of the narrative dice. The narrative dice are incredibly powerful because not only basically you build a pool, that's exciting and fun. You roll these dice, and then you have these symbols that you have to interpret, right? There is a learning curve on this, without a doubt, right? But the learning curve is worth it. These are like chicken bones that you like interpret, right? Once and so every roll is, you roll these dice, you process the dice, and you have a result that's remaining that can be incredibly exciting. You can have a despair, a triumph, an advantage, a disadvantage, all of this right stuff. By the way, I 100% use my Star Wars dice for these games. I have literally 8 sets of Star Wars dice, and I use them for Genesis. They're completely usable, and it's fine. Okay, so, but I cannot speak highly enough about the narrative dice. That's why this game is so great, is the narrative dice. And now we have a fantasy game that you can play with narrative dice. By the way, somebody actually did this a year ago. I think it was called Sky Warriors or something. Somebody actually built this game before FFG got to it. And FFG was like, that's cute. Now step aside and we'll actually do it officially, right? Which I feel a little bad for those people. It was like a European project. But it was pretty cool. I actually downloaded it. It was pretty amazing, actually. But basically, they the innovation in this game, incredibly high. Right, the flow, right? How does this game flow as far as play? It does not play faster than Dungeons and Dragons. It's very gritty and very crunchy, but I'm really down for that, because a lot of times I really want rules light. But the reason why I have so much tolerance for the high complexity and the crunch, it's not high complexity, it's a complex game, and it has crunch. It has a considerable amount of crunch, right? And the reason why I'm completely down with that for Genesis and for Realms of Terrinoth is players are excited about Realms of Terrinoth. When you introduce it to them, they're like, oh, this looks cool, man. There's lots of cool stuff in here to play. It really feels like a real tabletop role-playing game, not like a passion project, right? And that's incredibly important. Like, this is a 270-page book, and it is just chock full of awesome fantasy world and all that kind of stuff. And the flow, it is a complex game. It's crunchy. It plays slower than I like, right? But the narrative dice are totally worth that. And if you like crunch, you're going to love this game, right? So it's really good. The design overall, I really feel like this is a very well-designed rule system, and they really maximized how the rules work for Realms of Terrinoth, so that the races and the classes that are in the game mesh well with the rule set. Okay, so let's talk about the world, right? When the world, I'm going to talk about interest, and I'm going to talk, what's interesting in it. How does it play what are the options for player characters? Are the options for player characters good? And those type of things. And then also I'm going to talk about the design of the world itself. All right, so what's interesting in this? What's really interesting in this, as far as race options, you have humans, dwarves, humans, dwarves, elves, all the standards. You have gnomes in there, and you also have catfolk. So catfolk are the only really unique race in this. It's very much like Dungeons & Dragons, and it's very Tolkien, right? Which I am completely okay with, and actually it needs to be that way. That's another thing, is I discount all these, like, modern games. Like, here's a perfect example, right? I say, hey, D&D needs real competitors. Numenera, right? Numenera could have been a real competitor to D&D. It's absolutely not a real competitor to D&D. It has all the same, bona fides as Realms of Terrinoth, right? But there's no fantasy in Numenera. Numenera masquerades as a fantasy, but there are no gods, no magic in Numenera, right? And so in order to buy in on Numenera, their air quotes fantasy game, right? You need to buy in on hard science, and that, like, we're a billion years in the future, or many, many, many years in the future, well over thousands of years in the future, and that, basically it's the whole thing where science is so powerful it looks like magic. That's a hard buy-in, man. Getting 4 or 5 people who all believe the same way you do about science and magic, and that the world would even exist a billion years from now. That's a high ask, right? So I love that Realms of Terrinoth is very Tolkien and comes from a real, a fantasy world that you're not going to have to justify to your players, right? It feels very fantasy. It has dragons, right? Now, one thing I really love about it is the magic. The magic is one of the best things in the game. There's arcane magic. There is primal magic. There is shard magic, and there's rune magic, right? So there's literally four different kinds of magic within this game. And they really, really go into depth, and they give a lot of player options for this. The magic items in this are extremely innovative. The magic items, there's no +1 swords in this, right? It's really, every magic item feels unique and special, right? And I absolutely love that about this. It's really cool. So there's a lot of interesting things in this world. There's a ton of lore. There are areas there's like really special areas. The only thing there's one more thing I didn't like about this. In a couple of areas, there's the Al-Qadim. Like, D&D did this thing, Al-Qadim, and it was kind of like, oh, we're not going to call it the Middle East, but it is the Middle East. And, I'm really shocked that any of the games are still doing this, where they're saying, here's this area of our world that looks like this other area of Earth, right? And I'm like, no, man, we're beyond this. Like, come on, this, we know not to do this anymore. There's never going to be another D&D Oriental Adventures, right? We're beyond this. And so this game does not have that. There's only like 1 or 2 areas in here. I'm like, you're kind of like painting this to look like this area of the Earth. Just make it unique and make it mixed, and like, I just feel a little bad. Like, there's some parts in here where you're like, I don't know, man. I thought we were past this, right? So it's not a ton, and it's like 1 or 2 regions within Terrinoth, and I'm like, that's not cool. So it could have been done better. Now, to be clear, Dungeons & Dragons just got in trouble with the exact same thing with Chult. Not everybody was happy with how Chult was built, right? And it's exactly the same issue here, right? And then the other thing is the world designed well? It's designed extremely well. In fact, it's arguably designed better for play than D&D, because it was built for these board games, right? And so as far as, taking it also has this thing, rival, nemesis, and minion, different levels. The game is extremely good. I really, really, really loved Realms of Terrinoth. 5 out of 5 star game. Fantastic game. Highly recommend picking it up. You need Genesis Core Book, and then you need Realms of Terrinoth. If your group wants a cool alternative to Dungeons & Dragons, this is a cool alternative to Dungeons & Dragons. You can have a ton of fun with this game. I loved it. 5 out of 5 stars. Take care.